The conference room on the 34th floor of the Lynn Tower was silent, save for the low, monotonous hum of the climate control. 12 people sat around the mahogany table. Nobody was looking at me. They were all staring at the small, white slips of paper stacked neatly in front of the board secretary. "The votes are in," the secretary announced, his voice flat, devoid of the tension vibrating through the room. 6 in favor, 5 opposed, 1 abstention. I let out a quiet breath. According to the company bylaws, any vice presidential appointment required a 2/3 majority of the voting board. We had 12 board members. 6 votes was not enough. You needed 8. At the head of the table, Clara Lynn didn't even blink. She kept her hands clasped on top of a leather-bound folder. Then, slowly, she pushed a single document forward. "I am exercising my veto and executive tiebreaker authority," Clara said, her voice clear, cold, and entirely unchallenged. She looked across the room, her eyes scanning the faces of the 5 dissenting directors until they finally landed on me. "I approve Marcus Vance as the executive vice president of Lynn Group." Across the table, Marcus stood up. He smoothed the front of his custom-tailored Tom Ford suit and offered a shallow, practiced bow to the board. He tried to keep his face solemn, but the corner of his mouth twitched upward. "Thank you, Clara. Thank you, everyone," Marcus said, his voice dripping with Wall Street polish. "I won't let the board down." I sat at the very end of the table, as far from Clara as the room allowed. In front of me lay a different document. It was my own quarterly evaluation, fresh from the HR printer. Position: Chief Technology Officer. Performance rating: unsatisfactory. Signatory: Clara Lynn, CEO. "Peter," Marcus's voice broke through my thoughts. He was looking at me, his smile broadening just a fraction. "I'm looking forward to working closer with the engineering team. I think we're going to do great things." I didn't answer him. I picked up my heavy Mont Blanc pen, the one Arthur Lynn, Clara's father, had given me the day I joined this company. I flipped to the last page of my evaluation, crossed out the signature line, and pulled a fresh, single sheet of paper from my portfolio. It was my resignation letter. I wrote my name in bold, sharp strokes: Peter Blake. I capped the pen, stood up, and slid the paper across the polished wood. It glided over the slick surface, stopping right in front of Clara's leather folder. "I resign," I said. The room went dead silent. One of the older board members, a guy who had been friends with Clara's father for 30 years, let out a low gasp. Clara looked down at the paper, then up at me. Her expression didn't change. Her eyes were like slate. She didn't say a word. "Peter, come on. Don't be impulsive," Marcus said, stepping forward, his hand half raised in a gesture of fake concern. "We're all adults here. It's just a performance review. We can talk about this in private." I didn't look at him. I didn't look at Clara either. I pulled back my chair, picked up my leather portfolio, and walked toward the heavy glass doors of the boardroom. As the doors swung shut behind me, the glass muffling the room's acoustics but not entirely silencing them, I heard Marcus's voice rise. "Clara, look at him. Look at that attitude. He's been a liability for months." I walked down the hallway toward the executive elevators, my heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. 6 years. 6 years I had been married to Clara Lynn. 6 years I had poured my life, my sleep, and my sanity into Lynn Group. When we got married, Clara's father, Arthur Lynn, was still running the show. Arthur was a self-made tech pioneer who built his empire on real patents, not marketing hype. He saw me presenting a core database architecture at a minor tech conference in Chicago, bought out my contract from a mid-sized startup the next week, and brought me in as his head of development. He gave me shares. He gave me the CTO title. Eventually, he gave me his blessing to marry his daughter. "Peter," Arthur had told me over a glass of bourbon in his study, a week before the wedding. "Clara has the ambition, but she doesn't have the technical bone in her body. She sees numbers, you see the machine. Keep the machine running, and she'll keep the numbers growing." I kept my promise. When Arthur passed away 3 years ago and Clara took over, the transition was brutal. But I protected her. She didn't know the first thing about back-end architecture or machine learning pipelines, but she respected the work. I led the development of our 3 core software platforms. My team secured 27 proprietary patents. Under my technical leadership, Lynn Group's market valuation nearly tripled. Then, 6 months ago, Marcus Vance came back into her life. He was Clara's college sweetheart from Columbia. He'd spent the last decade in London and New York doing leveraged buyouts and venture capital matchmaking. When his firm went under, Clara immediately brought him into Lynn Group. First as deputy director of marketing. 3 months later, director. 6 months later, she cleared a seat for him on the board. I didn't care at first. I was too busy deploying our cloud migration. Clara needed allies on the board, and if a smooth-talking Ivy League guy could help her handle the institutional investors, I was fine with it. Until 3 weeks ago, when I tried to pull the quarterly budget reports for Project Apex, our next-generation neural networking platform. I had walked down to the finance department on a Wednesday afternoon. The chief financial officer, an old-timer named Jerry, wouldn't look me in the eye. "Peter, I can't release the full Apex budget sheet to you," Jerry said, shuffling papers on his desk. "What do you mean you can't release it?" I asked. "I'm the CTO, Jerry. I approved the allocation myself last month." "Clara changed the approval protocol last week," Jerry sighed, leaning back in his chair. "Any RD draw over $50,000 has to go through the CEO's office now. On recommendation from Marcus." "Marcus is in marketing," I said, my voice dropping. "Why is marketing dictating engineering budgets?" "Go talk to Clara, Peter. I just run the ledger." I went back to my office and logged into the enterprise system using my master override key. The screen didn't lie. Project Apex's budget had been slashed by exactly 30%. And the missing $900,000? It had been redirected to a new initiative listed under Marcus's department, Lynn Future. I opened the technical brief for Lynn Future. As I scrolled through the pages, my chest tightened. The system architecture, the node distribution, the security protocols. It was an exact carbon copy of the white paper I had authored 2 years ago. They hadn't even bothered to fix the typo I'd made in Section 4 regarding the latency parameters. I took out my phone and called Clara directly. "Clara, we need to talk about the Apex budget," I said the moment she picked up. "I'm in the middle of preparing for the board meeting, Peter," she said, her tone businesslike, clipped. "It'll take 2 minutes. Why was 30% of my RD budget reallocated to Marcus's project?" "Because Marcus ran the numbers," Clara said, her voice entirely flat. "Apex has been in development for 2 years, Peter. The ROI is too far out. We need short-term market wins to satisfy the institutional holders this quarter. Lynn Future can launch in 6 months. "Lynn Future is a shell," I said, my hand gripping the phone tighter. "It's my database framework wrapped in a flashy user interface. Your father understood that you can't build a high-growth SaaS platform without solid database infrastructure. You're cutting the foundation to paint the roof." There was a long silence on the line. I could hear the faint sound of her typing. "Peter, my father isn't running this company anymore." "I am. I know that, Clara. But I'm the chief technology officer. You don't make structural technical decisions without consulting me." "Marcus did a comprehensive market analysis," Clara said, her voice rising slightly, showing the first signs of irritation. "His team's projection shows a much faster adoption rate for his model." "His model is my framework," I shouted, unable to keep the anger out of my voice. "He stole my architecture." "It's not stealing if the intellectual property belongs to Lynn Group," Clara said coldly. "The patents are in the company's name. Do you expect us to pay you a royalty to use your own work?" I sat there, the phone pressed to my ear, completely speechless. The coldness in her voice was unfamiliar. This wasn't the woman I went home to. This was a CEO protecting her golden boy. "That's not what this is about, Clara," I whispered. "I have to go, Peter. We'll discuss this at home." The line went dead. I sat in my leather chair, looking at the blinking cursor on my computer screen. After a long minute, I reached into my desk drawer. I pulled out a small, black digital recorder, an old-school Olympus device Arthur Lynn had given me years ago. "Peter," Arthur's voice echoed in my head from a conversation we'd had shortly before his stroke. "The biggest mistake guys like us make is assuming everyone else plays by the same rules of logic. Document everything, especially when the lawyers get involved." I pushed the power slider on the recorder. It hummed to life. I plugged it into my laptop, created a secure, encrypted folder on my personal drive, and began dragging every email, every budget adjustment, and every system log from the past 6 months into a secure cloud server. I was done being the husband who kept quiet for the sake of the family business. The elevator doors opened on the ground floor. The lobby of the Lynn Tower was bustling with mid-level managers and clients. all of them moving past the giant digital screen displaying the Lynn Group logo. I walked out of the glass entrance and into the cool, damp Chicago air. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from Clara. "Are you coming home for dinner? My mother made your favorite pot roast." I stared at the screen for a long time. The screen flashed again, a second message appearing immediately below the first. "Marcus is coming over too. We need to finalize the press release for his appointment. Let's be professional about this, Peter." I locked the phone, shoved it deep into my pocket, and walked toward the parking garage. Professional, I muttered to myself. They wanted professional. They had no idea what that was about to cost them. The drive back to our house in Lake Forest was usually my time to decompress, but tonight, the steering wheel felt cold under my hands. 6 years. That was how long Clara and I had been married. 6 years of building a life that was now unraveling faster than a poorly written script. When Arthur Lynn was alive, the boundaries were clear. He was the visionary, I was the engine, and Clara was the steward of the family name. I had built the proprietary database that kept Lynn Group's enterprise clients from jumping ship to Amazon or Microsoft. I had personally coded the security protocols that saved us from the 2024 ransomware scare. Then came Marcus Vance. He had arrived 6 months ago, smelling of expensive cologne and the desperate, slick desperation of a disgraced Wall Street player looking for a soft landing. Clara had introduced him to me in our living room with a breathless excitement she hadn't shown toward my work in years. "Peter, Marcus is a genius with market scaling. He's going to help us unlock the value in your tech." Unlock the value. That was corporate speak for stripping the engine and selling the chrome. I pulled into the driveway of our colonial-style home. The lights were on in the dining room. Through the bay window, I could see 3 silhouettes: Clara, her mother Helen, and Marcus. I took a deep breath, grabbed my briefcase, and walked inside. The smell of pot roast hit me first, heavy and sweet. Helen was just coming out of the kitchen with a basket of warm dinner rolls. "Peter, you're finally here," Helen said, her voice strained with that polite, fragile warmth she always used when she wanted to ignore a looming disaster. "Come, sit down. Everything is getting cold." "Hey, Helen," I said, setting my briefcase by the entryway. "Peter," Marcus said, standing up from his seat next to Clara. He already had a glass of Cabernet in his hand, swirling it with the easy arrogance of a man who owned the house. "Glad you could make it. Clara and I were just talking about your work on the core database." I didn't shake his hand. I walked to the opposite side of the table and sat down. Clara was watching me, her eyes tracking my every movement. Her face was tense, the tight line of her jaw telling me she was already on the defensive. "What about my work, Marcus?" I asked, unfolding my napkin. "I was just telling Clara that the underlying architecture for Project Apex is brilliant," Marcus said, taking a sip of his wine. "But the delivery method is outdated. We're in a SaaS-first economy now. If we wrap your database framework into a subscription-based, user-facing API, call it Lynn Future, we can go to market by Q3. I've actually got some third-party market data here you should look at." He slid his iPhone across the table. On the screen was a slide deck from a boutique consulting firm in New York. The projections were beautiful: hockey stick growth curves, massive market penetration. I glanced at it for 5 seconds before sliding the phone back. "Who did this research, Marcus?" "Vanguard Analytics," he said, puffing out his chest. "They're top tier. Vanguard Analytics is run by your former associate at the boutique firm that went under in London," I said flatly. "And these projections are based on a concurrent user load of 10,000. Our actual user base is closer to 500,000. If you run your Lynn Future wrapper on my database without restructuring the node distribution, the server latency will crash the platform within 48 hours. Marcus's smile faltered, his eyes hardening. "Well, that's why we have you, Peter. To fix the minor technical details while we handle the big picture." "It's not a minor detail. It's a structural limit. And you slashed my budget by 30% to fund this joke." "Peter, that's enough," Clara interrupted, her fork clicking sharply against her plate. "Marcus is trying to help us scale. The board wants growth, and your RD cycles are simply too slow." "They're slow because I'm actually building the technology, Clara," I said, looking directly at my wife. "Not just writing pitch decks. If you launch his version, you're putting a Ferrari body on a lawnmower engine. It will break. The market won't wait for your perfect engine." "Peter," Clara said, her voice cold and final. We need to show traction now. So you're willing to risk our entire technical reputation on his word? I'm willing to trust the market experts, Clara said. And right now, that's Marcus. The table went quiet. Helen hurriedly started passing the pot roast, her hands shaking slightly. Let's just eat, please. No work at the table. I picked up my fork, but the food tasted like ash. I looked at Marcus, who was leaning back in his chair, taking another slow sip of his wine. He knew he had won this round. He knew Clara was entirely under his spell. The next morning, I was in my office by 7. I didn't turn on the overhead lights. The gray morning light filtering through the window of my 33rd floor office was enough. I opened my personal laptop, not the company-issued one, and hopped onto an encrypted video call. A few seconds later, Robert Finch's face appeared on the screen. Robert was a bulldog of a contract lawyer who had represented my father-in-law, Arthur, for 30 years. He knew the inner workings of Lynn Group better than anyone alive. Peter, Robert said, adjusting his glasses. I saw the board memo about Marcus's appointment. I figured I'd be hearing from you. They cut my budget, Robert, I said, leaning toward the camera. And Clara just approved a restructure that reallocates my core patents to Marcus's new project. I need to know where I stand. Robert sighed, rubbing his temples. When Arthur brought you on, he was worried about this exact scenario. He knew Clara was ambitious but easily swayed by Wall Street types. That's why we structured your employment agreement the way we did. The intellectual property clause, I said. Explain it to me again. Under the 2020 tech integration agreement you signed with Arthur, the 27 patents you developed are technically licensed to Lynn Group, Robert explained, pulling up a document on his screen. But you retain the underlying authorship and a right of reversion under specific circumstances. What circumstances? If the company commits a material breach of your employment contract. Specifically, if they unilaterally strip you of your duties, alter your reporting structure without board approval, or misappropriate your patented technology for non-approved commercial ventures. They've already cut my budget without my consent, I said. And Marcus is using my database architecture for LinFuture without a technical sign-off. That's a start, but it's not enough to trigger the reversion automatically, Robert warned. A judge will want to see a pattern of bad faith. We need written proof. Emails from Clara showing she bypassed protocol, meeting minutes where they ignored your technical objections, and any evidence that they are intentionally sidelining you to exploit your tech. I have the email exchanges about the budget, I said. And I recorded the phone call where Clara told me she didn't care about the technical objections. Robert looked up, his eyes sharp. You recorded it? Yes. Good. Keep doing that. If they push you out, or if they try to change your title to clear the way for Marcus, do not fight it. Let them do it. The moment they officially alter your role without cause, they breach the contract. And then we file for the reversion. And the patents? If the court rules in our favor, the exclusive license to Lynn Group terminates immediately. The 27 patents revert to your personal custody. They'll have 48 hours to strip your code from their systems or face federal patent infringement charges, which would shut down their entire platform, I muttered. Exactly, Robert said, a grim smile touching his lips. It's the nuclear option, Peter. If you pull that trigger, you will destroy Lynn Group. They're already destroying it, I said. I'm just taking my pieces back. I hung up the call, closed my laptop, and stared out the window at the Chicago skyline. My phone buzzed on the desk. It was an email notification from HR. Subject, urgent update, executive role realignment. I clicked it open. My hands didn't shake. I read the first sentence, and a cold, calm certainty settled over me. They were taking the bait. What would you like Peter to do next? Shall we proceed to Chapter 3, where the battle lines are officially drawn at the dinner table and the demotion is handed down? The dining room table was set for 4, but the atmosphere was thick enough to choke on. I sat across from Clara, while Marcus occupied the seat to her right, swirling his wine with a casual, practiced ease. Helen, my mother-in-law, kept busy by fussing over the serving platters, trying to mask the silence with the clatter of silver. The pot roast is wonderful, Helen, Marcus said, breaking the quiet. He looked over at me, his smile smooth and entirely put on. Peter, I'm glad you could make it. Clara and I were actually just discussing your framework for Project Apex. Is that so? I kept my voice flat, not looking up from my plate. Yeah, I think the underlying database architecture is solid, Marcus said, leaning forward. But the delivery needs to be modernized. I have some fresh market data here. We're thinking of wrapping your framework into a subscription-based API under the LinFuture brand. It gets us to market by Q3. He slid his phone across the table, displaying a sleek PDF slide deck. I glanced at the screen, then looked up. Who compiled this data, Marcus? Vanguard Research, he said, puffing his chest out slightly. They're one of the top tech sector analysts on Wall Street. Vanguard is a boutique firm run by your former Columbia roommate, I said. And these projections assume a concurrent user load of 10,000. Our enterprise client base handles over 500,000 daily transactions. If you wrap my database in your API without restructuring the partition keys, the servers will experience critical latency within 48 hours of launch. The system will crash. Marcus's smile stiffened. Well, Peter, that's why we have you on board. To handle the back-end plumbing while we focus on the big picture. It's not plumbing, Marcus. It's structural integrity. And you slashed my RD budget by 30% to fund this wrapper. Peter, that is enough, Clara snapped, setting her fork down with a sharp clink against her plate. Marcus is trying to help us scale. The board wants short-term growth, and your RD cycles are simply too long. They are long because I'm building proprietary technology, Clara, not just writing marketing decks. If you launch his version, you are putting a Ferrari body on a lawnmower engine. It will fail. We need to show the market that we are moving forward, Clara said, her voice dropping into her official executive tone. And right now, I trust Marcus's direction. So you trust a guy who doesn't even know how a partition key works over your own chief technology officer? I trust the person who is focused on the survival of this company, Clara said coldly. I picked up my glass, took a slow sip of water, and looked at Marcus. He was leaning back, a faint, satisfied smirk playing on his lips. He knew exactly what he was doing, and he knew Clara would back him up every single time. The hammer dropped the following Monday. I was in my office, reviewing server migration logs, when my Outlook chimed. The email came directly from HR, with Clara CC'd. Subject, organizational realignment and role adjustment. I clicked it open. There was no preamble. Effective 1st of next month, the role of Chief Technology Officer will be transitioned to Marcus Vance, who will assume the title of Executive Vice President of Technology and Market Strategy. Peter Blake will transition into the role of Senior Technical Advisor. The Senior Technical Advisor will report directly to the Executive VP of Technology. This role will focus on advisory consulting and will carry no direct project management or budgetary decision-making authority. My salary remained the same, but my performance-based equity bonuses, the very stock options Arthur Lynn had set aside for me, were suspended indefinitely. My phone buzzed immediately after. It was Robert Finch. Peter, the lawyer said, his voice grim. I just saw the corporate registry update. They actually did it. They stripped my title, took away my reporting line, and gave my job to Marcus, I said, my voice remarkably calm. Does this meet the threshold? It doesn't just meet it. It smashes right through it, Robert said. Under Section 9 of your original tech integration agreement with Arthur, a unilateral demotion or removal of material duties without board-certified cause constitutes a material breach of contract. They have effectively constructive discharged you from your executive position. What's the next move? We let them think they've won, Robert replied. Keep your head down. Do not argue. Do not make a scene. I need you to formally accept the transition in writing. Send a brief, professional email stating that you acknowledge the change. Once that paper trail is locked in, we file the petition for the patent reversion in federal court. How long will the filing take? I can have the paperwork finalized and submitted within 48 hours of your formal exit or resignation, Robert said. But Peter, once we file, the clock starts. Lin Group will have exactly 10 business days to respond before the court issues an injunction on their use of those 27 patents. If they can't prove they didn't breach your contract, those patents are yours. And they will have to strip your code from every single server they operate. Let them try, I said. Marcus doesn't even know where the servers are hosted. Get the written acknowledgement sent today, Peter, and keep that recorder running. I hung up, opened a blank email draft, and typed a single sentence. I acknowledge receipt of the role realignment notification and will transition to the advisory role as directed. I hit send. The trap was set. Now, All I had to do was wait for Marcus to walk right into it. The transition was handled with the clinical efficiency of a corporate layoff, even though on paper it was just a lateral realignment. I arrived at 8 on Monday morning to find 2 brown banker's boxes sitting on my mahogany desk. Marcus was already standing in the doorway, a mug of steaming coffee in his hand. He was wearing an engineered smirk that matched his tailored suit. "Morning, Peter," he said, leaning his shoulder against the doorframe. "Hope you don't mind. The facility guys said they needed to get started early to get the network drops routed for my team. We're moving the Lin Future core developers in here by noon." I didn't say a word to him. I ignored his presence entirely as I wrapped my framed engineering degree from MIT, the small brass compass Arthur had gifted me, and a few technical reference books. "You can leave the team photos on the wall," Marcus added, pointing to the large framed picture of my RD group celebrating our first major cloud migration. "It's a nice reminder of the company's history. Plus, most of those guys are working under my department now anyway." "They're my photos, Marcus," I said, placing the frame face down in the box. My new office was room 3312, a former server storage closet at the very end of the north corridor. It had no windows, just a buzzing fluorescent light that flickered every few seconds, and a gray metal desk that looked like state agency surplus. The walls were bare drywall, and the door didn't even have a lock. I set my boxes down and sat in the squeaking chair. Through the thin drywall, I could hear the muffled, echoing laughter from the main floor. Marcus's new office, my old office, was a glass-walled suite bathed in natural light. I was officially out of sight and very quickly being put out of mind. By Tuesday, the isolation felt deeply calculated. I walked down to the break room to grab a refill. On the way, I spotted Kevin, my former lead systems architect. He was one of the 3 engineers Marcus had reassigned to Lin Future under the guise of talent resource sharing. "Kevin," I said, stopping by his cubicle. "You got a second? I wanted to check on the database indexing protocol we discussed before the transition." Kevin flinched. He looked nervously over his shoulder toward Marcus's corner office before looking down at his keyboard, his hands hovering silently over the keys. "Peter, I really can't," Kevin whispered, his voice barely audible over the hum of the office white noise. Marcus made it pretty clear. He said any technical discussions about the database architecture have to go through him first. He's tracking our hours. If we're caught consulting with unauthorized advisors, it's going on our performance reviews. "An unauthorized advisor?" "Kevin, I'm still the senior technical advisor. It's my job to advise." "I know, Peter, but I have a mortgage and a kid starting college next year," Kevin said, his eyes pleading. "Please, just don't talk to me." "I get it, Kevin. Don't worry about it," I said, stepping back. I walked back to my windowless closet, the sting of the betrayal settling heavy in my chest. Marcus wasn't just taking my job. He was systematically cutting off my oxygen supply in this building. He was making sure the team knew that associating with Peter Blake was a career-ending move. Thursday lunch was the boiling point. I sat in the corner of the crowded corporate cafeteria, eating a dry turkey sandwich from a plastic container. I preferred the quiet of the corner, away from the whispered gossip that had been circulating since my demotion. The glass double doors swung open, and Marcus walked in, flanked by 2 junior product managers. He spotted me immediately. A smirk crossed his face, and he walked over, carrying a high-end salad container. "Mind if I join you, Peter?" Marcus asked, pulling out the chair opposite me without waiting for an answer. "Actually, I was just finishing," I said, reaching for my bottle of water. "Oh, come on. Don't be like that," Marcus said, leaning forward on his elbows. "We're colleagues. In fact, I wanted to pick your brain. We've been running some internal tests on the Lin Future API wrapper, and we're getting a massive latency spike whenever we simulate more than 5,000 concurrent connections. It's a minor bug in your core database, right?" I set my water bottle down. "It's not a bug, Marcus. I told you this at dinner. The database uses a distributed partition key structure designed to balance loads across regional servers. Your API wrapper is sending all the queries to a single master node because your team didn't write the routing logic to match the partition scheme." Marcus blinked, his smug exterior cracking for a split second before he recovered. Right. The routing logic. So how do we fix that? Can you write a quick patch for us?" "No," I said. "What do you mean, no?" Marcus's voice lost some of its fake warmth. "You're the senior technical advisor. Your job description literally says you provide technical consultation. Consultation means I tell you what the problem is, I said, looking him dead in the eye. It doesn't mean I write your code for you. You took the CTO title, Marcus. You took the budget, and you took the credit. If you want to run the department, write the routing logic yourself. Or ask one of the engineers you stole from me. Marcus's face flushed a deep, angry red. He stood up, slamming his hand lightly on the table. You're being deliberately uncooperative, Peter. I'll make sure Clara hears about this. Go ahead, I said, taking another bite of my sandwich. Tell her you don't know how to code a basic database router. He glared at me for 3 long seconds before turning on his heel and marching out of the cafeteria. 2 minutes later, my phone vibrated in my hand. Clara, what the hell is your problem, Peter? I heard you just picked a fight with Marcus in the cafeteria. I didn't reply immediately. I threw my sandwich wrapper into the trash, walked back to my desk, and sat down in my windowless room before typing back. Peter, I didn't pick a fight. I was eating lunch. He asked me to write code for his project. I told him how to solve his bottleneck, but I am not writing his scripts. I am an advisor, not his line programmer. Clara, he is the executive VP. If he asks you to help write a patch, you write the patch. Do you have any idea how bad this makes me look? People are already whispering that you're only still here because you're my husband. You're making a fool out of me. I stared at the screen. Sentinel of the company. That was how she saw herself, and she truly believed Marcus was the savior. Peter, is that what you think this is, Clara? You think I'm the one making a fool of you? Clara, I think you're bitter because the company moved past you. If you can't be a team player, maybe you shouldn't be here at all. Peter, if that's how you feel, fire me. Clara, you know I can't do that without cause. But you're pushing me, Peter. Don't make me choose between my husband and the survival of this company. I laughed out loud in the empty, buzzing room. The survival of the company. Peter, you already chose, Clara. 3 weeks ago. I locked the screen and tossed the phone onto the metal desk. I reached into my bag, pulled out my private, encrypted drive, and plugged it into my laptop. I had been logging Marcus's daily unauthorized access to my proprietary repository. The evidence was mounting, and the trap was nearly set. The boardroom was packed for the mid-quarter project review. Every major stakeholder and board member was present, including old Thomas Vance, no relation to Marcus, though they shared the same predatory eyes, and Arthur Lynn's oldest friend on the board, Frank Higgins. Marcus stood at the head of the room, clicker in hand, standing in front of a massive projection screen displaying the Lynn Future logo in high-definition green and silver. Clara sat to his right, her posture rigid and professional, nodding in approval before he even spoke a word. I sat at the far end of the table, my leather portfolio closed. I was technically there as the senior technical advisor, but my seat was so far down I was practically in the hallway. As you can see from our internal projections, Marcus said, gesturing smoothly to a slide showing a steep, upward-climbing graph. The transition from the old Project Apex model to the agile Lynn Future platform has been an unqualified success. We've managed to bypass the structural bottlenecks of the legacy architecture. Our preliminary testing phase is complete, and we are on track for a full commercial launch next month. The room erupted into polite applause. Clara smiled warmly, looking up at him. Excellent work, Marcus, Clara said, her voice carrying clearly over the murmurs of approval. The board is incredibly pleased with the turnaround time. Thank you, Clara, Marcus said, inclining his head. Of course, we have to acknowledge the foundational database work Peter laid before his realignment. It gave us a starting point. He looked down the table at me, offering a condescending nod. I didn't blink. Actually, Marcus, I said, opening my portfolio. My voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the lingering chatter instantly. Since I'm listed on this report as the technical sign-off advisor, I have a few questions about your testing phase. The room grew quiet. Clara's smile vanished. Her eyes locked onto me, signaling warning flares. Peter, Clara said, her tone warningly sharp. This is a progress update, not a technical deep dive. I understand that, Clara, I replied, pulling out a printout of the server logs I'd pulled that morning. But as the advisor, my fiduciary duty is to ensure the product actually exists before we tell the board it's ready to launch. Marcus, you said the preliminary testing phase is complete. Where is the load testing data? Marcus smirked, adjusting his cuffs. The data is currently being compiled by the development team, Peter. It's standard procedure. No need to get bogged down in the paperwork. It's been 3 weeks since you claimed the API wrapper was stable, I said, tossing my printout onto the middle of the table. I've been monitoring the AWS server cluster logs. Your team hasn't run a single simulated load test exceeding 100 concurrent users. Not one. Marcus's face stiffened. We've been running local sandbox simulations. It's a modern deployment pipeline, maybe a bit too advanced for your old-school methods. Local sandboxes don't simulate database routing latency. Marcus, I said, leaning forward. The core neural network algorithm in Project Apex, the one I spent 2 years writing, requires a multi-threaded distribution lock. If you try to run your single-thread API wrapper on it under real-world traffic, the database will lock up. It's a mathematical certainty. I spent 24 months trying to solve that specific threading issue, and you're telling this board you solved it in 90 days? We utilized a different, proprietary microservice architecture. Marcus snapped, his voice losing its polished veneer. What architecture? I pressed, staring him down. What's the name of the routing protocol? Who wrote the concurrency handler? Because your lead architect, Kevin, doesn't know. I asked him. None of your engineers know. That's proprietary information under my department's purview. Marcus yelled, his cheeks flushing red. You don't have the authorization to cross-examine my technical decisions. I have a seat on this board, Marcus, and I am the inventor of the underlying code, I said, my voice ice cold. You didn't solve the threading problem. You didn't write a microservice. You took my unfinished prototype, slapped a pretty web interface on top of it, and simulated a fake demo for Clara. The product is a shell. If you push this to production next month, it will crash, wipe out our client's transactional data, and ruin this company's reputation. That is a lie, Marcus shouted, turning to Clara. Clara, this is out of control. He's deliberately trying to sabotage this launch because of his personal grudges. Clara slammed her hand on the table, standing up. Peter, shut up. That's enough. The entire room went dead silent. The board members looked uncomfortably between Clara, Marcus, and me. The internal reviews have been signed off by the executive team, Clara said, her voice shaking with controlled rage as she looked at me. The technical feasibility has been verified. I trust Marcus's leadership, and I trust his timeline. You trust him? I asked, looking at my wife of 6 years. Clara, look at the server logs on the table. The proof is right there in black and white. He is lying to you. I said, enough, Peter. Clara yelled, her eyes flashing with a mix of anger and sheer embarrassment. Marcus is the executive VP of technology. His department makes the call. If you cannot align yourself with the executive leadership of this company, then you are a liability. I looked at Clara. I looked at the board members, who were all staring at their laps, too afraid of her wrath to speak up. Finally, I looked at Marcus. He was standing there, his chest heaving slightly, but his eyes were filled with absolute triumph. He thought he had just won the war. I slowly stood up. I didn't yell. I didn't make a scene. I reached into my breast pocket, pulled out a white envelope containing my official resignation letter, the one I had drafted weeks ago with Robert Finch, and placed it gently on top of the server logs. You're right, Clara, I said quietly. I can't align myself with this executive team. I resign. Clara froze. The anger in her eyes instantly flickered into a brief, sudden panic. Peter, don't do this here. We can talk about this at home. We're done talking at home, Clara. We've been done for a long time, I said. I picked up my empty leather portfolio, zipped it shut, and looked at her one last time. I asked you twice to look at the data. I asked you twice to trust me. You chose your Wall Street golden boy instead. I hope he's worth the price of admission. Peter, don't walk out of here, Clara warned, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. If you walk out that door, there's no coming back. I know, I said. I turned and walked toward the heavy glass doors of the boardroom. As the latch clicked shut behind me, the last thing I heard was Marcus's voice, trying to regain his composure. Well, as I was saying, board members, the Q3 rollout plan is. I didn't hear the rest. I took the elevator straight down to the lobby, stepped out into the crisp Chicago air, and pulled out my phone. I dialed Robert Finch. Robert, I said, my voice steady. It's done. I walked. Did they accept the resignation on the record? Robert asked immediately. In front of the entire board, I said. And I have the recording of Clara stating that Marcus's department made the unilateral technical decisions, bypassing my oversight. Perfect, Robert said, and I could hear the rustle of papers on his end. The material breach is locked in. I'm filing the petition for patent reversion with the federal court in 10 minutes. By tomorrow morning, Lin Group is going to get a very expensive wake-up call. Let's burn it down, Robert, I said, and for the first time in 6 months, I felt like I could actually breathe. The glass and steel lobby of Genesis Technologies in downtown Chicago felt like a different universe. There was no mahogany, no heavy velvet drapes, and none of the stifling family dynasty atmosphere of Lin Group. I sat in a leather chair outside the corner office on the 45th floor. 5 minutes later, the heavy door swung open, and Victor Sterling stepped out. "Peter," Victor said, his grip firm as he shook my hand. "Come on in. I've been looking forward to this meeting all week." I walked into his office. It was spacious, minimal, and overlooked the river. Victor didn't waste time. He gestured to the glass table in the center of the room, and we both sat down. "I hear things got pretty loud over at Lin Group last week," Victor said, a sharp, knowing smile on his face. "And then I get a call from your attorney, Robert Finch, telling me that you're suddenly a free agent, with 27 core patents in your pocket." "They aren't just in my pocket, Victor," I said, opening my briefcase and placing a certified copy of the federal court's preliminary injunction on the table. As of 9 o'clock yesterday morning, the Northern District of Illinois granted our emergency petition. The exclusive license Lin Group held over those patents has been suspended pending the final breach of contract hearing. Effectively, the IP is mine, and Lin Group is currently running a platform that is 90% patent infringement. Victor picked up the court document, scanned it quickly, and let out a low whistle. Arthur Lin's old right of reversion clause. I always knew the old man was smarter than his board. He put a kill switch in his own son-in-law's contract. He put it there to protect the technology, I said. And now I'm looking for a partner who actually wants to build it. Victor set the papers down and leaned forward. "Let's talk numbers, Peter. What is it going to take to bring you and your patents to Genesis?" "3 million base salary," I said flatly. 5% non-dilutable technical equity, and a seat on the executive committee. I want an independent R&D budget of 10 million for the first fiscal year, and I bring my own team. I'm pulling 3 of my top engineers out of Lin Group the second my non-compete is legally cleared. "And what about Lin Group's legal team?" Victor asked, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Clara Lin isn't going to let you walk over here to her biggest competitor without a fight. They're going to sue you for violating your non-compete." "They can try," I said, "but the moment they committed a material breach by demoting me and misappropriating my patents, the non-compete became legally unenforceable. Robert has already drafted the countersuit. If Lin Group files against me, I need Genesis to cover all associated legal fees." Victor stared at me for several seconds. The silence in the room was absolute. Then, he let out a short, dry laugh and stood up, extending his hand. "Done," Victor said. "Your neural networking framework is the only thing keeping Lin Group afloat, Peter. With you and those patents on our team, we'll eat their market share by the end of the fiscal year. Welcome to Genesis." "Thank you, Victor," I said, shaking his hand. "You won't regret this." By 3 o'clock that afternoon, the Genesis press release went live across every major tech and financial news outlet. Genesis Technologies appoints Peter Blake as Chief Technology Officer, acquires exclusive rights to next-gen neural database patents. My phone started buzzing before I even made it back to my car. Missed calls from Lin Group board members. Text messages from former colleagues. Emails from tech bloggers asking for comment. I ignored all of them. I set the phone to silent, flipped it face down on the passenger seat, and drove to my temporary apartment. By the time I sat down at my desk with a cup of black coffee, the screen lit up again. "Clara." I hesitated for a second, then slid the bar to answer. "Peter." Clara's voice was breathless, tight with panic. "What the hell did you do? Have you seen the news?" "I saw it, Clara," I said, keeping my voice entirely flat. "Are you insane?" she yelled, her voice cracking. "You went to Genesis? Victor Sterling? He has been trying to destroy my father's company for a decade. You just handed him our entire proprietary database architecture." "I handed him my architecture, Clara. The 27 patents that belong to me. They belong to Lin Group." She screamed. "We paid for the development. We funded your lab. You breached the contract when you stripped my title, cut my budget, and let Marcus Vance copy my white papers without my consent, I said, my voice ice cold. Your father structured the agreement specifically so you couldn't do this. I warned you twice in the boardroom, Clara. You told me I was a liability. You told me Marcus was the future. Well, now you can build your future without my code. Peter, please, she said, her voice suddenly dropping, the anger giving way to a desperate, shaky plea. We can fix this. Come home. Let's talk about this. I'll fire Marcus. I'll give you back the CTO title. We can restructure the board. It's too late, Clara, I said. You never asked me why I wanted to leave. You just assumed I was bitter. You didn't trust me, and you didn't respect the work. Peter, we're married. You're ruining our family. You ruined the family when you brought Marcus into our dining room and let him steal my life's work, I said. I'm protecting my tech. That's all I've ever done. I'm going to sue you. Peter, she whispered, the cold executive returning. I will tie you up in court until you don't have a dime left to your name. Tell your lawyers to look at Section 9 of the 2020 agreement again, Clara, and then check your server logs. Have a good evening. I hung up. I didn't give her another second of my time. I opened my personal email and dragged her contact info into the block list. Then I did the same with her phone number. The door to my past was officially locked. The next morning, I walked into the temporary conference room at Genesis. Robert Finch was already sitting there, a stack of legal documents in front of him. We just got served, Robert said, sliding a thick blue folder toward me. Lynn Group is suing for breach of non-compete, tortious interference, and theft of trade secrets. They're asking for an emergency injunction to stop you from working here. Are we worried? I asked, sitting down. Not even a little, Robert smiled. The judge we got for the patent hearing is the same one handling this motion. She's already seen the evidence of their material breach. I'm filing our opposition brief in an hour. By tomorrow afternoon, their motion will be dead in the water. Good, I said. What about Clara? She tried to call my office 3 times this morning, Robert said, looking at me over his glasses. She wanted to know if you'd meet her. Just the two of you. At that little diner near your old house in Lake Forest. The one you two used to go to on weekends. I stared at the blue folder on the table. The memory of those quiet Saturday mornings, before Arthur died, before the corporate greed took over, flashed through my mind. It felt like a lifetime ago. Tell her no, Robert, I said. Are you sure, Peter? A settlement negotiation now could save a lot of public mess. It's not a negotiation, I said, looking up. Tell her that in that boardroom. I gave her 2 chances to look at the data. I gave her 2 chances to believe me. She chose to trust a fraud instead. Tell her to enjoy her launch next month. The fall of Lynn Group began with a whisper on Wall Street and ended with a roar on the NASDAQ. For weeks after my exit, Genesis Technologies launched Genesis Core, our newly optimized neural database platform. On the very same day, the federal court denied Lynn Group's motion for an emergency injunction, leaving my 27 patents firmly in my custody and effectively locking them out of their own core infrastructure. By Friday, Lynn Group's stock was down 18%, with industry analysts downgrading them to a hard sell. My phone rang at 6 p.m. on a Tuesday. It was Robert Finch. Peter, Robert said, skipping the pleasantries. They're drowning. Clara just authorized their lead counsel to offer a formal settlement. They want to sit down. What's the offer? I asked, looking over a system latency report on my monitor. They are offering to settle all outstanding patent and contract disputes, Robert said. They will pay you $50 million in cash and offer you a 10% equity stake in Lynn Group. In exchange, you grant them a permanent, non-exclusive license to the 27 patents, and you sign an NDA regarding the entire affair. I let out a short, cold laugh. $50 million and 10% of a sinking ship. They must be desperate. They are. Without your database architecture, their Lynn Future platform is a paperweight. Their enterprise clients are already threatening to migrate to Genesis. But Peter, $50 million is real money. It's a massive win. It's not about the money, Robert, I said. I don't want their stock, and I don't care about their cash. If they want this to go away, there is only one condition I will accept. Name it. Marcus Vance publicly admits to technical fraud and plagiarism, I said. I want a recorded, public apology posted on the Lynn Group homepage and distributed to the major tech press. He admits he stole my white papers and lied to the board about the software's readiness. He signs it, he posts it, and then he resigns. If they do that, I'll take the 50 million and sign the release. Robert was silent for a long moment. That will completely destroy Marcus's career. He'll never work in tech or finance again. He should have thought of that before he tried to build an empire on my code, I said. Tell them it's a take it or leave it offer. They have 48 hours before we proceed to the formal damages hearing. I'll deliver the terms, Robert said. It took them less than 24 hours to break. The video was posted on the Lin Group Investor Relations portal on Thursday morning. It was exactly 2 minutes long. Marcus sat in front of a plain gray background, looking pale and hollowed out, his expensive suit suddenly looking a size too big. My name is Marcus Vance, he said, his voice flat, stripped of all its Wall Street arrogance. I am issuing this statement to formally apologize to Dr. Peter Blake. During my tenure as Executive Vice President of Technology at Lin Group, I inappropriately utilized Dr. Blake's proprietary database architectures and misrepresented the development status of the Lin Future platform to the board of directors. I accept full responsibility for these actions. Effective immediately, I have resigned from my position. I watched the video twice. Then I closed the browser tab, signed the settlement papers Robert had couched to my office, and authorized the release of the $50 million. By Friday afternoon, the funds hit my account. I didn't keep a single cent. I transferred the entire $50 million to the computer science department of my alma mater, MIT, to establish a fully endowed research fund. The title of the grant was simple: the Blake Endowment for Technical Integrity. A year later, the transition was complete. Genesis Technologies was now the undisputed market leader in enterprise neural databases. My engineering team had grown from a small group of loyalists to a division of 50 elite developers. Victor Sterling had offered me the title of Executive Vice President of the entire firm, but I turned it down. I told him I just wanted to build things. He respected that, gave me a state-of-the-art lab, and left me alone to code. I was finishing up a review of our new quantum encryption database patch when my assistant knocked on my office door. "Peter," she said quietly, "there's a woman downstairs in the lobby. She doesn't have an appointment, but she says her name is Clara Lynn. She asked if you had 5 minutes." I looked at the code on my screen, then at the clock. "Send her up." When Clara walked into my office, I almost didn't recognize her. The sharp, tailored executive suits were gone, replaced by a simple, oversized black trench coat. She had lost weight, her face was drawn, and her dark hair was pulled back into a hasty, practical bun. There was no makeup and no armor left. She stood near the door, looking at the bright, open space of my office, before slowly sitting on the edge of the leather sofa. "Thanks for seeing me, Peter," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Sure, Clara," I said, leaning back in my chair. "How are things?" "Not good," she said, looking down at her hands. "The board is forcing me out. After the settlement and the hit to our reputation, the institutional investors lost faith. They're bringing in an interim CEO from a private equity firm next month. I'm being relegated to a non-voting board seat." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, and to my surprise, I actually meant it. I wasn't angry anymore. The anger had burned out months ago, leaving only a quiet, clinical distance. "Arthur built a great company. It's a shame to see it restructured by private equity. He built it with you," she said, looking up at me, her eyes red-rimmed. "I didn't see that. I thought the business was about the deals, the scaling, the marketing. I thought you were just the guy in the basement keeping the lights on. I didn't realize you were the foundation." "A lot of people make that mistake," I said, "until the building collapses." Clara swallowed hard, a single tear slipping down her cheek. "Do you hate me, Peter?" "No," I said, shaking my head. "I don't hate you at all, Clara. I'm actually grateful." She blinked, confused. "Grateful? After what I did? If you hadn't pushed me out, I'd still be in that boardroom, fighting the same old battles, protecting a company that didn't appreciate the work," I said. "You forced me to stand on my own 2 feet. I have my respect back. I have my tech back. And I have a team that actually understands what we're building." She pulled a tissue from her pocket, wiping her eyes, and stood up. "I'm glad you're doing well, Peter. Truly. I needed to say I was sorry. I should have believed you." "Yeah," I said. "You should have." She walked to the door, paused with her hand on the handle, and looked back over her shoulder. Do you think we? Do you think we'll ever talk again? Outside of business? I don't think so, Clara, I said quietly. The code has too many legacy errors. It's better to just write a new program. She let out a shaky breath, nodded once, and walked out, closing the heavy glass door behind her. I sat in the quiet of my office for a long minute, looking at the empty doorway. Then, I turned back to my desk, opened my compiler, and looked at the flashing cursor. I hit the Enter key and typed the first line of the new system documentation. // system architecture, version 2.0. Built for scale. Built on respect. I smiled, clicked compile, and watched the green lights on the server rack blink in perfect, uninterrupted synchronization.